Have you ever wondered if it's possible to resaw a sponge? If so, there's something really wrong with you, and I'd like you to stop watching. The rest of you, let's make a bowl. We need an inside mold and an outside mold to make our bowl. For the outside mold, I'm starting with an MDF ring, which is a little bit larger than the diameter I want, and then I'm propping that up for the height that I want. Then I cut up the cereal box into strips, and I just hot glued those strips, draping them inside of my form. What I'm not showing you is, after all of this, I went over the whole inside with multiple layers of packing tape, and that just sealed everything together and made it a lot more solid. To go in between the pieces of sponge, I'm using these microfiber mitts, and I'm cutting off the little fingers that are on there. I used about one side of one mitt's worth of fingers. My thinking was that these little things would, first of all, add some more color, and second of all, I could add more in where there was a bigger gap between the two pieces, just fill those in. So the answer to the age-old question of can you resaw a sponge is sort of. Sometimes they go through and sometimes they get stuck. The sponges that I got had a scrub side on them. I just want to get rid of that, so that's the only reason I was resawing them. Then it was just a matter of cutting them up into sort of triangle type shapes, and then start putting the puzzle together. It was really a pain getting the little finger thingies in there, especially at the bottom where they just did not want to stay where I put them. I'm sure that some of you are wondering, do I have to use Cheerios? Can I use like Frosted Flakes or Lucky Charms? And that really just goes to show that I didn't do a very good job of clearing out the weirdos at the beginning of the video. So the rest of you, well, I guess we're stuck with you. The inside of the mold is just pieces of 2x that I glued together and then turned into the shape. And it ended up just being sort of a trial and error to get it to fit well enough that you really can't tell how well it's fitting down to the bottom. The purpose of this inner mold is twofold. Number one, it takes up all that internal volume, and it also gives something to attach the faceplate to. This is where things started to go wrong. First of all, I hadn't used the epoxy in quite a long time. I didn't prime the pumps. The resin was fine, so that threw me off. Hardener was only giving me about half of what it should have been for the first, 8 pumps. So I was expecting that the whole bottom of the bowl was going to end up being uncured, but that ended up not happening. So I kind of lucked out there. The hardener that I'm using is the 205 fast hardener. I'm not using the slow because it needs a minimum temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and my shop is usually colder than that. I kept filling up the mold as it would drain down, and then after about 45 minutes it started to bubble, and then it started to smell like something was cooking, and steam and foam, and it was epoxy boiling out. It was fun times, let me tell you. I can only imagine how much more interesting it would have been if I had gotten all that extra hardener down at the bottom. So I really didn't know what to expect taking out of the mold. The good part was that the mold worked. It really didn't leak out very much through the bottom. There was a little bit, but hardly anything. Put up a bit of a fight, but I got it out and I got most of the tape off. And I trimmed around the rim where the epoxy had boiled over. And I'm including this shot at the beginning of me not using a glove, just to show you that I tried not using a glove, because you're not supposed to wear a glove at the lathe. But this stuff hurts when it comes off of there, and you're going to wear a glove if you do this. I did keep my hand behind the tool rest the whole time. Also, my lathe is really not very powerful, and when I get a catch, the lathe just stops, so I felt pretty safe. This is probably the 3rd or 4th bowl that I've ever turned, and it's the largest that I've ever turned, even though it's really not that big. So you really don't want to be watching me to learn how to turn. To do the inside, I didn't think it would be a good idea to drill a hole and try to mount that on the chuck, grabbing it from the inside. So I just put a flat on the bottom, took it off the lathe, and epoxied on a round piece of wood, and I would grab that in the chuck. And that also gave me an opportunity to sort of fill in a couple of areas that looked a little suspect. So I got it back on the lathe and trued up that disc and finished sanding the outside. Then I got it turned around and I started by drilling out the center, which was a mistake because I thought that turning the 2x4 material would be really easy, but I actually had quite a bit of chatter, even taking a light cut, and I think that's really down to my lathe. But I needed to bring the tailstock back in, and that meant I had to very slowly work off down to the point where I could get the tailstock back in. It left me with very tight space to work in because my tailstock doesn't have that much reach. I had been using the mid-size Easy Wood Tools round scraper. On the inside, I couldn't get the tool rest in very far. I didn't have the reach to get in there, so I went to my bowl gouge, which I'm not very good at sharpening. And so it was sharp on the end, but not so much on the left side. So when I got down into the epoxy part, I ended up using my parting tool for the most part, because that's the one I know how to sharpen. It's easy. Wasn't exactly the smoothest finish on the inside. With the Easy Wood Tool scraper, I kept getting catches on the inside. I'm not really sure why. When I was using the side of it, it just kept catching. So I used the parting tool. Whatever works, right? So I guess the good part of using this sort of mold type thing is once you've gone through the wood, you know you're close to your finished thickness. So there really isn't any guesswork there. I ended up taking off more from the outside than I was really expecting, which didn't really leave me a whole lot on the inside. I had probably a ½ inch of thickness to start with, and I was down to like a quarter by the time I got done with the outside, at least at the rim. And for the finish, I'm just using Armor Seal. So the end result, there's a lot of void. So I thought the epoxy would fill in more of that, but a lot of the epoxy came back up out of the mold because of the eruption. So I'm really not sure what would have happened if that hadn't happened. And there's quite a bit of this foam that's in there, which sort of looks like freezer burn. Kind of ruins it, but from a distance it looks okay. For a first attempt, I think it's pretty good. I'm not really in love with the way the little finger thingies ended up being. If I had it to do over, I think I would cut the edges of the sponges on a little bit of a bevel so that there wasn't much of a gap on the outside. And I might just leave out the finger thing. It's colorful, which is what I was going for. The yellow parts kind of look like pineapple, which is kind of making me hungry now.